Imagine discovering that the worst betrayal of your life wasn't caused by hatred. It was caused by someone wanting to keep you, not wanting to lose you, not wanting to face consequences, not wanting to give up control. When we think of manipulation, we imagine obvious villains, cruel, dangerous people, but psychology suggests something far more unsettling. The most effective manipulation rarely arrives looking dangerous. It arrives looking like affection, like attention, like concern, like love. Let's call her Sarah, not because it's a woman's name, but because this could be anyone. For nearly 2 years, Sarah believed she was in the healthiest relationship of her life. Friends admired it. Family trusted her. She trusted her partner. Then one conversation changed everything. A conversation so ordinary that most people would have forgotten it by the next morning. But Sarah couldn't, because for the first time, something didn't fit. A small contradiction, a detail that didn't make sense. And once she noticed it, she couldn't stop noticing others. The apologies, the disappearances, the perfectly timed affection, the explanations that always sounded reasonable, the moments that felt insignificant on their own, but unsettling when viewed together, and a question began to haunt her. Had she been loved, or had she been managed? What Sarah eventually discovered wasn't a single lie. It was a system, a pattern, a way of influencing behavior without appearing controlling. And that's what makes this story disturbing, because Sarah wasn't the first person to encounter it. Machiavelli described many of the same dynamics 500 years earlier. He wasn't writing about relationships. He wasn't writing about romance. He was writing about power, about loyalty, about influence, about the ways human beings can shape the behavior of other human beings. Yet some of the principles he described appear in modern relationships with astonishing accuracy. Not because people are evil, but because human nature has not changed. The fear of loss, the desire for control, the need for security, the temptation to influence rather than communicate. These instincts existed in royal courts, and they still exist today. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some relationships feel impossible to leave, why certain people can appear trustworthy while hiding entirely different motives, and why the most dangerous manipulations don't control your choices. They control the story you tell yourself about those choices. Because manipulation rarely begins with cruelty, it begins with affection. And once you learn to recognize the difference between love and strategy, some behaviors become impossible to unsee. Machiavelli argued that if a ruler cannot be both loved and feared, fear is often the safer option. He also warned, be feared but never hated. Fear controls behavior. Hate destroys power. At first, this sounds unrelated to relationships, but consider Sarah. When the relationship began, everything felt effortless. Messages arrived quickly. Plans were made eagerly. Affection felt natural. For the first time in years, she felt secure. Then something changed. Not dramatically, just enough to make her wonder. Some days her partner seemed deeply invested. Other days he felt distant, cold, unreachable. Whenever Sarah started pulling away, her partner's warmth returned. Just enough, just in time. A thoughtful message, a perfect apology, an unexpected compliment. And slowly, without realizing it, Sarah began thinking about him more than ever. Not because she felt secure, but because she didn't. And here's where the story becomes strange. The human brain often becomes most attached not when affection is predictable, but when it becomes unpredictable. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement. The same principle that helps explain why slot machines become addictive. You never know when the reward is coming. And because you never know, you keep trying. Neuroscience shows unpredictable rewards trigger 2 times more dopamine than predictable ones. That's why uncertainty hooks harder than consistency. The uncertainty becomes the hook. Relationships can sometimes work the same way. When affection appears and disappears unpredictably, the brain becomes increasingly focused on restoring connection, not because uncertainty feels good, but because uncertainty demands attention. This is where many people become confused. They mistake emotional intensity for emotional connection, but they are not the same thing. Healthy love tends to create peace. Manipulation tends to create vigilance. Healthy love allows your nervous system to rest. Manipulation keeps it searching, waiting, analyzing, hoping, because the strongest prison is rarely the one that locks the door. It's the one that convinces you the next reward is just around the corner. But uncertainty is only the beginning. The next principle is far more difficult to recognize, because if manipulation depended on looking suspicious, almost nobody would fall for it. Machiavelli advised rulers to appear virtuous, not necessarily to be virtuous, to appear that way, because people judge what they can see, not what they cannot. This is where Sarah's confusion deepened. Whenever she expressed concern, something strange happened. Nobody agreed with her. Friends defended her partner. Family defended him. Co-workers praised him. Everyone seemed to have the same reaction. He would never do that. And honestly, Sarah wasn't entirely sure herself, because her partner always looked sincere. His explanations sounded reasonable. His apologies sounded genuine. His calmness looked like honesty. And this reveals something important about human psychology. We often assume that confidence equals truth, that calmness equals innocence, that charm equals character, but they are not the same thing. Psychologists call part of this phenomenon the halo effect, when one positive trait causes us to assume the existence of many others. A charming person becomes trustworthy, a successful person becomes wise, a confident person becomes honest, even when evidence is missing. And here's what makes manipulation so difficult to detect. The most effective manipulators don't fight their reputation. They build it carefully, patiently, deliberately. Because once people trust the image, they stop questioning the behavior. And when image becomes stronger than evidence, reality starts becoming negotiable. Which brings us to Machiavelli's most unsettling lesson: why force someone to believe a lie when you can slowly reshape what they think is true? At first, Sarah questioned her partner. Eventually, Sarah questioned herself. And that is the moment manipulation becomes truly dangerous. Not when someone lies to you, but when the lie becomes stronger than your own perception. Small contradictions became misunderstandings. Broken promises became miscommunications. Clear memories became things she was remembering wrong, at least according to her partner. This is why gaslighting is so psychologically damaging. Its purpose is not merely to change what you believe. Its purpose is to make you distrust your own judgment. And once that happens, something powerful changes. You stop looking for evidence. You start looking for reassurance. The most effective manipulation doesn't change reality. It changes your interpretation of reality. Suddenly, every concern feels irrational. Every doubt feels unfair. Every instinct feels unreliable. And because human beings naturally seek certainty, many people begin trusting the manipulator's version of events more than their own. Machiavelli understood that controlling perception is often easier than controlling people directly. What he did not discuss was the psychological cost, the confusion, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the slow erosion of trust in oneself. And once trust in yourself begins to disappear, leaving becomes much harder, not because you don't see the problem, but because you no longer trust your ability to recognize it. Whenever stories like Sarah's are discussed, one question always appears: why didn't she leave? It's a simple question, but psychology suggests the answer is anything but simple. Because leaving a relationship doesn't only mean losing a person, sometimes it means losing years, memories, plans, identity, the future she imagined. Psychologists call part of this the sunk cost bias, the tendency to continue investing in something because of what has already been invested, even when walking away might be healthier. And this bias becomes incredibly powerful in relationships. The longer someone stays, the harder leaving can feel, not because the relationship improves, but because the emotional cost of admitting reality continues to grow. So people negotiate, rationalize, hope, wait, not because they are weak, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are human. And this is where many manipulative dynamics become self-sustaining. The relationship survives not because it is healthy, but because leaving feels more painful than staying, at least in the short term. Yet there is one final twist to this story, and it may be the most important lesson of all. Machiavelli didn't discuss this, but he understood one thing: power isn't always chosen. Sometimes it's inherited from the patterns we learned as children. One uncomfortable truth often gets ignored. Not every manipulator is a villain. Some certainly are, but others are simply frightened. People who learned early that love was unpredictable. People who discovered that control felt safer than vulnerability. People who became experts at influence because honesty once felt dangerous. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain it. Because human beings often repeat patterns long before they understand them. The child who feared abandonment can become the adult who creates uncertainty. The child who learned manipulation may grow into the adult who uses it automatically, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. And that may be the most unsettling lesson of all. Sometimes the people hurting others are repeating strategies that once protected them. Perhaps that's why Machiavelli still feels relevant 5 centuries later. He understood something timeless about human nature. Human beings want love, but they also want security, control, certainty. And when those desires collide, people sometimes choose strategy over sincerity, influence over honesty, control over connection. The question is not whether these instincts exist. They do. The question is whether we recognize them before they damage the people we claim to care about, in others, and in ourselves. Because the most dangerous manipulations don't control your choices. They control the story you tell yourself about those choices. And perhaps that's why manipulation is so difficult to recognize. Because it rarely arrives looking dangerous. It arrives looking familiar, comforting, loving. Just as it always has, manipulation rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with affection. And the moment you learn to distinguish love from strategy, you reclaim something no manipulator can take from you: the ability to see clearly. When you recognize this pattern, name it silently. Don't argue. Set one boundary. Watch if they respect it. Their response tells you everything. If this spoke to something you've lived through, you're not alone. Subscribe to Think Deeply and share this with someone who needs to hear it.